In a development that drew global attention, former President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin recently engaged in an extensive 85-minute phone call, marking one of the longest direct conversations between the two leaders since Trump left office. The primary focus of their discussion was the ongoing war in Ukraine, a conflict that has reshaped international relations and continues to dominate headlines around the world. According to sources close to the matter, Trump initiated the call in an effort to better understand the current state of the conflict and to explore whether there was any realistic potential for renewed diplomacy or a possible ceasefire. The tone of the conversation was described as serious and at times tense, but ultimately it did not result in any significant breakthroughs, underscoring just how deeply entrenched both sides remain in their positions. One of the most contentious topics was Ukraine's recent drone attacks on Russian airfields. Putin reportedly viewed these strikes as a major escalation, interpreting them as not only a tactical threat, but also a significant blow to Russia's military prestige and image on the world stage. Putin's visible anger and frustration over these attacks highlighted the high stakes involved and his personal investment in the outcome of the conflict, making it clear that emotions are running high at the very top. After the call, Trump described the exchange as positive in tone, but he also admitted that the situation is far more complicated and difficult than he had previously suggested in public statements, signaling a more sober assessment of the crisis. The lengthy conversation revealed that, while dialogue between leaders is possible and even necessary, the path to peace remains blocked by deep disagreements, mutual distrust, and hardened attitudes on both sides. This episode demonstrates that personal relationships and direct talks, though important diplomatic tools, cannot easily overcome the complex geopolitical realities and historical grievances fueling Europe's largest land war since World War II. Ultimately, the conversation offered a sobering glimpse into the Kremlin's current mindset and highlighted the immense obstacles that still stand in the way of any meaningful negotiated peace, leaving the world to watch and wait for any sign of progress. Putin's reaction to Ukraine's recent drone attacks dominated the call, with the Russian leader vowing retaliation. The strikes on Russian airfields marked a red line for Moscow, hardening Putin's resolve and making de-escalation less likely. Putin told Trump that Russia would respond forcefully, signaling a new, more volatile phase in the conflict. This cycle of attack and retribution traps both nations in escalating violence. Putin's frustration was as much about the psychological impact as the material damage, fueling a more aggressive military posture. His refusal to absorb these attacks without a response shows Russia is not in a mood for concessions. The Kremlin's focus remains on achieving its objectives through military force, not diplomacy. For international observers, Putin's message was clear: Russia is preparing to double down, and hopes for an imminent diplomatic breakthrough are slim. Trump's optimism about mediating peace faded after his call with Putin, as the conversation exposed the deep complexities of the conflict. One major obstacle is Putin's refusal to negotiate directly with Ukrainian President Zelensky, whom Moscow dismisses as illegitimate. Meanwhile, Zelensky's calls for dialogue are often paired with military triumphs, which Moscow sees as insincere. This dynamic breeds mistrust and blocks genuine negotiation. No concrete steps toward a ceasefire emerged from the Trump-Putin call. Both sides remain entrenched, unwilling to compromise on territory or sovereignty. The war is likely to continue on the battlefield until a dramatic shift in fortunes or political will. The call confirmed that even with outside involvement, peace depends on the primary combatants moving beyond maximalist positions. For now, that shift seems highly unlikely. The Kremlin continues to blame the West for prolonging the war, asserting that Western powers are deliberately extending the conflict to weaken Russia's global influence and destabilize its government. This is a point Putin has repeatedly emphasized in discussions with Western leaders, including former US President Donald Trump, highlighting the perceived injustices against Russia. Russian officials consistently accuse the US and its allies of waging a proxy war, using Ukraine as a pawn in a larger geopolitical game. They frame Russia as a victim of Western aggression, portraying the nation as defending itself against an encroaching alliance. Moscow has demanded that Washington and London take decisive action to restrain Kyiv, urging them to influence Ukraine's decisions and actions. This demand effectively shifts the responsibility for de-escalation onto Ukraine's allies, suggesting they hold the key to peace. This strategy pressures the Western coalition to reconsider its support for Ukraine, creating a diplomatic dilemma. It suggests that peace is only possible if the West withdraws its military and financial support for Ukraine, a condition unlikely to be met. Russia views the conflict as a broader confrontation with the West, not just a bilateral issue with Ukraine, framing it as a struggle for influence and power. By addressing demands to the US and UK, the Kremlin attempts to bypass Kiev, seeking to force great power negotiations that exclude Ukraine. This approach complicates diplomacy, as it undermines Ukraine's sovereignty and denies it agency in its own fate, making negotiations more challenging. As long as Russia refuses to engage directly with Ukraine, the prospects for a peaceful resolution remain dim and uncertain. The ongoing refusal to engage directly with Ukraine means that the chances for peace are slim, and tensions continue to simmer. Prospects for peace remain dim, as the lack of direct dialogue hinders any meaningful progress. The risk of a wider conflict persists, with the potential for escalation looming over the region. As the diplomatic deadlock continues, the world watches anxiously, hoping for a breakthrough that seems increasingly elusive. Amid the Ukraine crisis, Trump and Putin found rare common ground on Iran's nuclear program. Both agreed that Iran must not acquire nuclear weapons, highlighting a shared security interest. Putin indicated Russia's willingness to re-engage in nuclear talks with Iran, opening a potential path for renewed diplomacy. This cooperation stands out against the backdrop of broader tensions, showing that shared threats can unite rivals on specific issues. The agreement on Iran offers a small opening for dialogue between Moscow and Washington. While it won't resolve larger disputes, it demonstrates that pragmatic, issue-specific cooperation is possible. Even in times of conflict, common interests can create opportunities for limited engagement. The Vatican, led by Pope Francis, has emerged as a consistent voice for peace in the Ukraine conflict. The Pope has personally urged Putin to halt the violence and embrace dialogue, adding a moral and humanitarian dimension to international efforts. His message is clear: true peace requires negotiation, not military force. The Vatican's diplomatic efforts aim to foster an environment where talks are not just possible, but necessary. While lacking political leverage, the Vatican's moral authority keeps the hope for peace alive. Its persistent calls remind leaders of their duty to protect human life amid the devastation. The Vatican's role is to build bridges and encourage empathy in a conflict defined by animosity. Though results may be slow, this moral leadership is a crucial counter-narrative to the logic of war. The Trump-Putin call, while significant in its own right, did little to change the grim outlook for peace. Despite the high stakes and global attention, the conversation ended without any substantial progress or breakthrough. The divide between Russia and Ukraine remains vast and seemingly insurmountable, with Putin's hardline stance and threats of retaliation signaling a commitment to continued conflict. His rhetoric suggests a readiness to escalate rather than de-escalate tensions. Russia's strategy of addressing demands to the West effectively sidelines Ukraine, blocking direct negotiations and complicating any potential resolution. This approach has left Ukraine feeling marginalized in discussions about its own future. Ukraine, buoyed by recent military gains and steadfast Western support, has little incentive to accept Russia's terms. The morale among Ukrainian forces and citizens remains high, bolstered by victories on the ground. As long as both sides believe in battlefield solutions, the war will grind on with devastating consequences for civilians and soldiers alike. The human cost continues to mount, with cities in ruins and lives shattered. The Trump-Putin agreement on Iran offers a faint hope for cooperation, but does not signal a broader thaw in relations. It remains a small step in a much larger and more complex geopolitical puzzle. The core conflict over Ukraine and European security remains unresolved, with NATO and other international bodies on high alert. The military buildup at the borders continues to be a source of tension and concern. Communication channels like the Trump-Putin call help manage risks and prevent misunderstandings, but they are no substitute for a real peace process. True dialogue and negotiation are needed to pave the way for lasting peace. For now, the war seems destined to continue, with the world left to hope for dialogue and brace for a prolonged crisis. The international community watches anxiously, yearning for a resolution that seems ever elusive.